Today I have 5 tips for improving your landscape photography that don't involve buying gear. So for photographers, camera gear is just something that's really easy to talk about. When we can't get out photographing things, we tend to drift towards talking about gear, whether it be about our own camera, whether it be about some improvement or upgrade that a new camera could do. Does this camera system do that better? Does it do this better? It's just really easy to get caught up in it. And I admit it, I talk about gear on this YouTube channel quite frequently, usually because I know it. People are going to go out and buy gear and they want to know how it works in the field. With that said, despite how often I do talk about gear, I try to always disclaim that and put caveats on that don't worry about your gear so much. If you're looking for new gear, hopefully this information is helpful, but don't get so caught up in gear that you feel like you can't become a better photographer because your gear is holding you back. In today's modern age of cameras, and even if you're photographing on a DSLR or an entry-level mirrorless, the odds of the camera actually holding you back for your landscape photography is very slim. There's just so much we can do to improve our photography skill that doesn't involve buying new gear, and that's what we're going to look at today. I've got 5 tips of things you can do today that don't require you to buy new gear. So the first thing you can work on is mastering the camera that you have today. And this includes just both understanding basic photography settings, how to change those settings on your camera, a couple advanced techniques, and just making things easier to get to. So let's take a look. First, we've got the exposure triangle, and I know it's overdone, it's hyped a lot, but just getting a proper exposure is so important. I know I see it a lot on my workshops that I lead. I'll see someone out there, they know what they want to capture, but they're uncertain about how to get the right exposure. So it pays off to take some time to really understand the exposure triangle. What's the shutter speed doing? What's aperture doing? What's ISO doing? And really put some time in on that. Once you master it, you can move on and start to work on the creative elements of photography, which is probably why we're all here. But it's worth taking that time to really understand that. It's such a fundamental. So the first thing is understand the exposure triangle. And if you have that mastered, now apply it to your camera. How do you make those setting changes on your camera? Is it just the dials? Make it become just muscle memory to make those changes. It'll just let the camera, which is a tool for us photographers, just get out of your way when you're out in the field. The less you have to think about your camera and how to make it do something, frees up your brain space to do creative compositions, to explore different pieces and parts. Or maybe you walk up to a scene, you know what you want, and you'll have the confidence to use your camera to capture that. So really practice that stuff. Watch some more videos on exposure triangle, take your camera out, practice that, and give it a try. Again, make sure you know how to adjust your camera. You might know shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. Do you know how to change those settings quickly in the field and confidently to know what's going on? Learn how the light meter is working in your camera. Learn how to use the histogram. That's the single biggest thing that changed my landscape photography and made me more confident from the technical side, was learning how the histogram worked and using it in the field. Take the time to learn that. As you learn those basics, that's just the bottom foundation of everything. Think about some additional techniques that do come into play frequently for landscape photographers. Things like exposure bracketing. When do you want to exposure bracket? Why would you exposure bracket? Do you know how to manually exposure bracket? And can you set your camera up to do exposure bracketing for you? Explore those settings in your specific camera so that if you're in the field and feel like you want to exposure bracket, you know how to do it without getting confused and frustrated. Similar, focus is a big thing for landscape photographers. We want our scenes sharp from the front to the back. And sometimes you can't get to an aperture that lets you do that. So you're going to need to focus stack. Take multiple images with different points in focus that you can blend later. Take some time to understand focus stacking. Do you know how to manually focus stack? Work your camera, work your shots through manually to do that by moving your focus point? Maybe your camera has an automated setting to sort of make that a little easier for you. Figure out how your camera does that, look it up, and you can use that while you're out in the field when you're in a situation where it's like, I can't get my aperture to where I want to get this all in focus. I'm going to have to focus stack, but just know exactly how to do it instead of, again, causing frustration and confusion in the field. And then finally, as you start to pull all these settings together, this is the other piece that a lot of people stop just a little too short. They have all these settings, but then they get out in the field and they're buried in menus or they're just not easy to access. So they get out there and they know, oh, I want to do an exposure bracket, but they don't know where their settings are or exactly what their settings mean. Most cameras these days have a quick menu that you can add frequently used settings to. Figure out what the quick menu is on your camera and add some of these common, more advanced shooting techniques to it so that when you do want to use those, they're at your fingertips, easy to get to, and it's not constantly having to try to remember where is this buried in the menu. So take some time to configure your camera efficiently. That can include remapping buttons to do certain things. We talked a little bit about focus. Back button focus is a popular thing to do for landscape photographers to help you improve your focus. You're going to want to map that to a button. Where is that? There's all sorts of little buttons you can do. I have exposure delay. I like to be able to go from when I'm handheld, no delay. When I put it on a tripod, I like to have about a 2-second delay, which on a Nikon camera I do through exposure delay. And I have that mapped to a button. Whenever I'm going back and forth, just press a button, change the dial, and I'm quickly there. So those little things all add up to give you a really strong foundation to make you more confident and efficient in the field, which again, camera's a tool. You want the tool to stay out of your way. You want to master your tool so that you can just not have to think about camera settings as much, or just know what you want to change on the camera so that you can focus on the creativity of landscape photography. None of this takes any money. It's just learning your camera. Take the time to do it and get out there and practice it. So next up, once you've got the camera fundamentals pretty figured out, to me, where my evolution in landscape photography went to was composition. In my eyes, composition is a little bit difficult. It is one of the things I'm continually working on changing, working on getting better at. But how do you go about improving that? Well, it doesn't take gear. It takes time out in the field and sort of consciously thinking about what makes an image strong from a compositional point of view. First, we've got the rules. I actually prefer to call them guidelines because you can bend them, tweak them, but in photography they're called rules. And these are things like the rule of thirds, where you place your subject within the frame, where you place your horizon within the frame. Then you've got leading lines, things that lead your eyes into the frame or through the frame to interesting things. And then you've got things like strong foregrounds and things like that when you're doing a wide scene or any kind of scene where you want to just give your picture some form of anchor where you get an interesting foreground element and using that to your advantage, making sure that's interesting. Those are the rules and the guidelines. Once you sort of have those in mind, then you've just got to get out there to practice these things and experiment. Moving beyond the rules, things that can influence your composition is camera height. So many people I see, and I'm sometimes guilty of it, just look at my videos. You can see a lot of times I'm standing there, tripod up about chest height, and I'm taking a picture. That's just the common scene, and it's really easy to fall into that trap of just, I'm just right here, standing up, shoot, it's nice, comfortable, and that's it. Take the time to really experiment, consciously experiment with low compositions. Move around, left, right. What can you put in the foreground? What does it change? Likewise, try some high compositions. A lot of times you can get some interesting separation of some rocks in the foreground by shooting from a higher composition than a mid or low. But you got to play with that to sort of get a feel for it. That way when you walk up to a scene, similar to mastering your camera settings, you're going to start to know what tools you have to work with compositionally to create an interesting scene. You may walk up to something, have a lot of rocks in the foreground, and realize, you know, to make this a little better so these rocks don't all blend into each other, if I raise my camera up, I could get this a little more. Maybe you're trying to reinforce a leading line that is just a little stronger if you bring your camera down low. Again, sort of a combination of taking the rules, applying them to techniques in the field, and sort of piecing it all together so you sort of have this toolbox to draw from in order to get these strong compositions. Additionally, another tip I have for compositions is study other photographs. And again, this doesn't mean scrolling through Instagram real quick and just, oh, that's a nice picture, like it, scroll through. Deliberately consume. I've done a video on deliberately consuming photography books, and it's a good way to go. What I'm talking about is you look at an image and take 5 minutes to look at it. What draws your eyes to it? What do you think the photographer was doing? How were they manipulating your eye? Where your view went? What was their camera angle? Was it high, low? Did they do something unique that's like they did something different than just stand there with the camera on a tripod? Think about and consider those things. I sort of like photography books for that. And another thing I like is photography exhibits at museums, because when you go to a museum, you're in that mindset of I'm here to observe and appreciate art. And you can look at these photographs and stand in front of them and think about them. You can move back, you can move forward. It's just a really great way to sort of force that deliberation about what you're looking at if you're constantly getting distracted by social media or looking at things on your computer. Again, while you're at the museum, go look at some paintings. A lot of what we learned about how light works and how composition works and how scenes work, we learned from the painters. So go look at some paintings. How did they paint this? They have all sorts of flexibility and liberty in how they paint their scenes. So they're building upon some really strong compositional elements of how things go together. So while you're at the museum, go look at paintings and see what you can learn from them as well. But building those fundamentals of composition are important. Again, for me, I feel like I've been working on composition for years, and I don't really see an end in sight to getting to the point where I feel like I've mastered it. But I feel like I've got a foundation of things to practice to help me make those incremental improvements. Next up, we've got learning to see the light. As a normal non-photographer person, we go around and we occasionally see a great sunset or a great sunrise or some light doing something interesting, but really, it takes becoming a photographer to really start to see some of these nuances of light. You know, we learned the basics early on. You got your blue hours, that light before sunrise or just after sunset that can do some very interesting things for your scenes and worth either showing up super early for or staying late for to photograph. We've got the golden hour. Everyone in photography pretty much learns this within a day or two of reading about photography. The golden hour, the sort of the hour-ish right after sunrise, the hours before sunset. We get the sun low in the sky, we get some reflection off of clouds, and we just get that really soft, pleasing light with some typically warm hues, depends on the day, but just, you know, great times to photograph. We all know that, but there's other things to keep an eye out for. Like I said, when I first started landscape photography, sunrise, sunset photography meant shooting towards the sun. That's just what it was supposed to mean, right? But I've learned, actually, a lot of times, look around. Keep your head on a 360 swivel, look around, because you'll see the light doing something interesting somewhere else. That's sort of a learned thing. You learn that just because it's sunrise, sunset, doesn't mean the light show is happening right in front of you. It could be happening directly behind you, eliminating some peaks behind. I've got some photos I like that are actually 180 degrees away from the sunset or sunrise. Sometimes it's a side light thing. You've got ridges and hills and the light is just lighting up one little ridge and it just makes for a better scene. Maybe you're in the woodlands or a forest or something like that, and you're looking for light filtering through, you're looking for backlit scenes that just sort of give this nice soft glow. We all know I like to photograph waterfalls, and I like it when I get that little glow up behind the waterfall in the little river valley or canyon or drainage back behind it, and you just get that glow, you get your nice little waterfall, you get your leading line and that glow back there. But my point is, one of the things that can make your photography better is learning to see this light in this extra detail. This can be practiced while you're out actually photographing, or it can be practiced while you're driving around. Keep an eye out. What do you see? You might not even have a camera with you, but you can see interesting things. And when you see them, think about it. What is making it interesting? Is it where the sun is in the sky? Is it a certain time of day? Is it how the sun is positioned in front of or behind? But just take this time to think about how the light works, because learning to see and sense the light will build your eye up to capture more interesting photographs where the light is more interesting. And it just takes a little bit of practice in order to get your mind thinking that way and to more consciously see these scenes unfold in front of you. Okay, so we've mastered our camera fundamentals, we've made things quick and easy, we're getting to feel the building blocks of composition, so we're starting to get out there, be able to work that and improve our composition skills. We're learning to see the light a little better. We've got a whole bunch of in-the-field things to do. But now we've captured our photo as a raw file, and you bring it back home and you're going to bring it into your favorite editing software and start to edit it. You're going to post-process it. This can take a lot of practice. There's a couple things at play here. First, similar to the camera, there's technical things to learn. How does your editing software work? Where are the buttons? What does this button do? What does this slider do? So there's those technical fundamentals first. Play with that and learn, what does adjusting exposure do? What's adjusting whites, blacks, shadows? What's adjusting texture, clarity, saturation? What do those all do? What does the tone curve tool do? What does color grading do? How does the sharpness settings work? Those are all technical pieces of your editing software that you want to start to get familiar with. Now on that front, it can be very overwhelming, especially if you're using something like Photoshop, even Lightroom. When you first open it up, there's this whole row of sliders of like, where do I start? But take some time to understand the basics. Start with just the tones and learning how that works. Move on to color and start with that. Moving beyond that, we start to talk about editing techniques. We talk about global adjustments affecting the whole image versus local adjustments, which are affecting just certain areas of the image. Once you learn that, learn why you might want to change one versus the other. Learn how to change one versus the other, which is going to take you into the world of masking and brushes and things like that. It can get really overwhelming. I know it was overwhelming to me initially as well, but as I continued to practice, I get certain skills and tool sets that are routine. I know what I want to do and I know how to do it. But it took some practice and some reading and some watching videos to understand that. But spending some time really mastering post-processing can really help you take your images to a next level. Now, with that said, I'm not saying over-edit your images. I think some of the better edited images are ones that are just drawing out things that are already in the scene. You know, we capture a raw file and it's relatively flat. We're going to have to do some editing to bring things back out, bring some of that contrast back out and sort of recreate it the way we saw it, enhance it a bit. So I'm not saying learn how to over-edit your photos. Learn how to do it stylistically and match your style. But it's worth taking time to sort of learn that tool, whether it be Adobe Lightroom, Adobe Photoshop, Affinity Photo 2, or any number of other photo editing software out there. Learn how the tool works, practice with that tool so you can make those adjustments. You'll start to get more confident with your editing ability, and you'll start to see your pictures improve over time. But do take some time to really practice that editing and get it to become second nature, so you feel like you know your way around the tool and where you want to take a picture and know how to take a picture a certain direction you want it to go. Okay, and the way to bring this all together is you've got to get out there and practice these things. Anyone that's watched my channel before knows I'm a big proponent of getting out there and practicing. I'm the first to say you can only watch so many YouTube videos, read so many articles, look at so many books before you've got to put those things down, head outside, and practice it. And that's what my last tip is. You've got to get out and practice these things. The camera fundamentals. You can sit down, you can read the owner's manual, you can watch videos on how your camera works, but the second you get outside, in the field, away from internet or anything like that, unless you've practiced, you're going to feel flustered. Your mind's going to get overwhelmed and you're going to forget how to do things. Exposure triangle that you thought you'd mastered while watching a video, as soon as you take it outside, you're having to think through. You haven't built those muscles up yet. Similar for composition. We can learn all the basics about composition all we want. We can watch 10 videos, read 20 articles, read a book on composition, and think we've got it all mastered. We've got leading lines, we've got rule of thirds, we've got angles, we've got how do we simplify to tell a story. But the only way to really sort of drill those rules and learn those rules and techniques and learn what works for you and what doesn't work for you is to get outside with your camera and practice it. No amount of reading, watching videos is going to improve your skill set as much as getting out there and practicing it. Learning to see the light. You can read books on backlighting, front lighting, side lighting, diffuse lighting, and it can sort of make sense, but until you witness it, watch it, and try to categorize it in real time, it's just not going to become natural. So you got to get out there, practice seeing the light, look at it, see what's going on, catalog it, and your mind will start to have this massive library of what types of light work, what type of light appeals to you, and allow you to build from there. Moving into the post-processing. Again, you got to practice it. You can watch videos on how Lightroom works and how this slider works, and you can watch how it works on their photo. But until you see it work on your photo, it just doesn't really sink in. It'll give you the basics to start practicing, which is what we want. Watch some videos to get the basics, but at some point you've got to do this on your own photos. You know, for me, one of my early on things was I would get confused on global adjustments versus local adjustments. I've said before, I really think they should call local adjustments targeted adjustments, because in my head, I don't know why, local was like I'm making changes on my local file, not a file in the cloud. Get silly, I know it, but it's one of those things that unless I practice, I don't sort of figure it out. That was a hurdle to me. I did a lot of global edits initially before it finally clicked what they meant by local adjustments, and then I started practicing those, which opened up the door to what tools do I have to make these local adjustments. I've got brushes, I've got luminosity masks, things like that. But again, you can watch video after video, read article after article. Unless you start practicing with your software, you don't get to see how it works with your photos. You don't get to set to try it. You don't get to figure out how much is too much, how much is not enough. So again, practice, practice, practice. That's the key to all of this. And it doesn't cost money and gear. You just got to get outside and practice. And I know you're thinking, well, I don't have the money to go travel all the time and do trips. You don't need to. One of my first videos on this YouTube channel was about getting outside and practicing locally. And you cannot underestimate the value of that. You've probably got a metro park, a city park, something like that. Head out and practice. Sometimes this practice doesn't have to be capturing portfolio-worthy images. It could be just experimenting and practicing with camera settings. Can't count how many times I've helped people with focus stacking or exposure bracketing and just not pretty scenes, because we've been working on the technical of it and not so much we're capturing a portfolio or the image as we work through these techniques. It's been much more, we're just working through the techniques. This picture doesn't have to be pretty. At the end of the day, I want you to understand how your camera worked to do that. And then when you travel to someplace cool, you have the capability to capture that image. So again, practice, practice, practice. So again, at the end of the day, it's really easy to fall into the trap of chasing new gear. And I don't always help with my YouTube channel by talking about batteries and lenses and things like that. Like I said, I do it because I know you are going to go buy new gear, and that's okay. But don't get caught up on acquiring new gear as being the hurdle to improving your photography. It's just not the case. What you have today is plenty good enough to get out there and start improving your craft. And I'm hoping these tips here are some ways to remind you of some of the fundamentals you can work on and practice to improve your photography. So I will highlight a few videos here that focus on some of these fundamentals that you might find helpful. And I'll also have a longer list of videos down in the description below if you're looking for, okay, I want to go watch a video knowing how to improve this so I can go out and practice. Don't forget the practice part. Anyways, thank you for watching.